Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of VISTV. My name's Joan Viscardi, and I am super excited today to have members of the Viscardi team with me. You all met John Viscardi at the last TV episode. If you haven't, please watch it. Go back. It's there for your viewing pleasure. But today we're here to discuss New York State, what makes Viscardi special in our handling of New York State, and why do we talk about New York State? Why do we focus on New York State? But I'd like to turn it over to John. You did such a fantastic job interviewing me last week. I ask you to facilitate this episode today. So welcome.
Hello, thank you. And hi, everyone. My name is John Viscardi. I'm the Executive Vice President of Viscardi. And yeah, today is a very special episode. It is kicking off season 3 of VISTV. We've had 2 fantastic seasons before this one. And VISTV season 3 is all about New York. So what makes New York special from the perspective of workers' compensation, the history of New York as it relates to employers and employees and workers in the state, and then how Viscardi interfaces and collaborates and works within New York State. We specialize and have from the very beginning specialized in workers' compensation in New York State. And we are here to share some of that expertise and mastery with you and the world. So today we have members of our team who have all areas of deep mastery after decades for some of us working in workers' comp, specializing in New York. And I am really looking forward to having this conversation, getting some insights from all of you and sharing that. So let's start off with Sarah. Sarah Falco is our Senior Vice President of Operations. Sarah, you see workers' compensation and you see the work at Viscardi from the 10,000-foot view, and you also are on the ground doing a lot of the work every single day. So maybe could you give us a brief overview of the services that Viscardi offers, and in your perspective, or from your perspective, why you see New York State being a state worthy of specialization, as it were?
Sure. Thank you, John.
Sure.
Some of the services we offer are nurse case management services for workers' comp claims, as well as medical treatment guideline reviews. We do offer a number of other ancillary services to those, but I feel like those have really been our 2 main services that have carried us through many, many years of service to the industry. For nurse case management services, I always like to say that when people ask me what I do for a living and I say workers' compensation, nurse case management, they look at me blankly. And I usually explain it as somebody gets hurt at work and an insurance carrier that's covering that employer that they work for wants to help them out and help them navigate the system. So they ask us to put a nurse on the file, and telephonically they help them through all the different parts of the claim, from, where to go to the doctor, to how do I get my payments while I'm out on disability, workers' compensation disability, and how do I get back to work safely. In New York State, there's a lot of detailed application processes for the claim, for approval and denial of treatment, and we help with that through the PAR system, which is a new system the board has put into place just recently.
I'd like to add to that, if I may. The board, we talk about New York State, and we have Deidre here and we have Dana here today as well, who, to Sarah's explanation of our services, actually carry out those services. And New York State, I think what's very interesting, and we kind of have lost sight now, or 2023, or through COVID, but New York State Workers' Compensation Board rolled out the medical treatment guidelines in 2010. That's actually 13 years ago. That's amazing. And when it started, it was literally just addressing injuries to the neck, the back, the shoulders, and the knees. Then a year comes by and 2 years come by and we add carpal tunnel syndrome, we add non-acute pain. But I could ask Deidre and Dana, what body parts aren't on the list of body
Good
parts
question.
now for New York State? You know, New York State has gone well beyond, I believe, many states in the nation. Sarah mentioned, yes, other states do have guidelines, standards of care, standards of practice, but New York State has really nitty-gritty broke down treatment to body parts. So right now we have what? Elbow, hip,
Ankle,
ankle,
Ankles, foot,
neck.
right? Depression. We have PTSD. We have traumatic brain injury. We have occupational lung disease. We could go on and on. But, you know, even in preparation for today's meeting, I was thinking, what body parts are left? Anybody have any ideas? What body parts are left that the state can add to it?
the eyes. That's one that's not on there yet.
Yeah, ear. What did you say, Dana?
Sorry, Joan. Dental, there's no dental on there yet.
Yeah, so I think we still can expand, you know, but I wanted to just tag on, Sarah, to what you said with us working on, you know, compliance and the medical treatment guidelines. They are continuously expanding. So I don't want to, you know, be the touter of our great work, but we are experts in those body parts.
And I guess the question that comes to my mind is how do you stay on top of all of those rules? And how do we, but all of you specifically, stay on top of them and then integrate them into the process? And then Sarah, maybe from your perspective too, how do we integrate it company-wide? But yeah, anybody, just curious about that from your perspective.
I use Deidre for my main resource, I would say.
Okay, so Deidre,
But-
please
Yes.
share.
I mean, I think it's really important that Viscardi as a whole, we try to stay on top of everything. So we sign up for all the workers' comp board emails and we make sure we read them thoroughly. We pass them throughout the company. We also pass them throughout our clients. You know, like Joan was saying, it started in 2010, changed a little bit a few years later, changed again. At that time, we were using forms. I'm sure some of us who are viewing this video right now remember MGs and C4 auths and MG1s. And now we've moved since last year onto prior authorization requests, also known as PARs. I mean, I think the board has definitely developed into a more digital style, especially, you know, COVID came and forms, they wanted everything to be more exact and more traceable, and so that everybody had access to it. And I think they're doing a pretty good job at making sure that everything goes on to the board so people can view it. And I think that it's important that we continue to follow what the board is you know, releasing, because things change every day. And I know a lot of times we send in suggestions, and I'm sure other people do also, and they take that into their, you know, whole pool of questions and or suggestions, and they try to do what's best for everybody.
Yeah, kudos to you, I think, Dee, on that, because you're very proactive in your relationship with the board. I think, John, to add to your answer, we house our own database of information. We have the Viscardipedia, you know, that is a resource for everybody. So anybody who's learning something new, Sarah rolls out a policy and a procedure, you can find it there. It really helps. But I also think our collaboration with others in our stakeholder group, not just our competitors, but the people that we work with, allows us to really stay on top of things. And, you know, kudos really, Dee, to what you do. You're in services, you work with the team, you work with clients, you know, and then kind of Dana takes it all and then works with the nurses. So there's a consistent, I think, communication and collaboration.
Yeah. And so Dana, you're working with all of these stakeholders every day in the case management work that you're doing as a nurse case manager. So can you talk a little bit about how you interact with all of those stakeholders, and how maybe as a nurse doing workers' compensation in New York, you have to be cognizant of certain rules and regs, for example, not directing care. And can you just kind of like describe a little bit of that, those relationships and that everyday work?
Yeah, of course. So our stakeholders are the providers, the insureds, the carriers, the claimants. A big part of the nurse's role with communication with all of those stakeholders is, in fact, like very open communication. So calling the claimant, calling the provider's office, keeping the insured and the carriers all updated on an injured worker's treatment or where we think the claim may be headed. It's all so important in our role. And understanding the guidelines for each injury that we encounter is also very important. We want to make sure that providers are staying on track, they're following the guidelines, and they're sending in treatment requests when indicated. And also want to make sure the claimant's getting the appropriate treatment. So we really want to stay on top of everything, especially with those guidelines, especially with the providers that, you know, may want to request things that maybe aren't recommended for that body part at that time of treatment, you know. So definitely a big part of that is just open communication with everybody.
Great.
When I hear you say, talk about that, it brings me back to, I don't know, John and Sarah, you talk about decades ago. We used to have a case study of Mr. Montori. Mr. Montori was this injured worker, you know, and there were comorbidities that Mr. Montori had. So when I think about that, Dana, could you talk a little bit about comorbidities and in New York and standards of care, and what is a nurse's responsibility when you talk about the medical treatment guidelines? We cannot talk about New York State without a really clear understanding of the medical treatment guidelines. So give me an example of where comorbidity might, in New York State, have a red flag.
Sure. So anyone who is well, first I want to say is that taking a clear claimant history and medical history is so important when you first open up the claim. Now, you want to make sure the claimant is staying healthy, because like Joan had mentioned, there are some treatments that may be affected by comorbidities. For example, if someone has diabetes and they are recommended for a ESI, an epidural steroid injection, you know, the provider is injecting steroids into the spinal column or between the discs. And those steroids can increase someone with diabetes, increase their sugar. So you want to make sure the claimant's aware of that they know what to monitor for after the injection and be prepared for that before the injection. So there are definitely some comorbidities that can be affected by treatment. Another one would be, for example, if somebody was a smoker, you'd want to know how much do they smoke, what do they smoke. If somebody were going in for, let's say, like a lumbar fusion, I've seen providers actually, you know, not schedule the surgery, even though they are a surgical candidate, because you want to be mindful that when someone smokes and undergoing that kind of surgery, they're at risk for complications post-op. So, okay. Yeah, it's definitely important for the nurse to understand all comorbidities, to get a good, clear history, and the claimant understands any kind of potential outcomes based on those.
And how do the medical treatment guidelines relate to those comorbidities when it comes to injuries on specific body parts or to specific body parts or aspects of the human mind and body?
So the medical treatment guidelines are broken down by body part, and then they're also broken down by injury and then treatment and procedure. So what I really like about the guidelines is that it will list many treatments that could be requested for an injury, but they'll also say what's recommended and what's not recommended.
Okay.
So it provides that sort of that insight or reference to refer to when something's being requested and you're like, I don't know if it should be requested for this body part at this time of the injury, and the guidelines will literally guide you to what the response should be.
So I want to throw this out to Sarah. Sarah, what do you do then as the head of operations, where you have nurses that are really aware of the comorbidities and the impact, and you have Deidre and Deidre's team who's responding to the medical treatment guidelines or to requests in general by providers in New York State are working with it? How do you keep everybody or ensure, when I say, Sarah, is everybody up to date on what's happening? You know, it doesn't just fall on Dana, who is the assistant director of nursing. It really falls to you as head of operations to ensure we're all practicing in New York State the way we should.
Mhm.
Well, we do have regular meetings with the team. At least weekly, we have meetings with the administrative staff to make sure everybody is up to date with everything that they need to be in terms of regulations and anything else that might be on the horizon. And then we also have company meetings. We send out many reminder emails, but the main thing that I think helps us all come together and make sure we're all on the same page with every claim and request is our internal database. It also has a number of triggers that alert us to certain different pieces of information in the claim that someone might need to know as they're moving forward in reviewing that treatment request.
True, that is true. That's how we do it. That's called
Mhm.
Vera. We call
Yeah,
that
I
Vera.
was just thinking about that. So yeah, what is Vera? Can we talk about that for a moment and how that system comes?
Yeah, I'm going to leave that to you.
Yeah, that's a good one for D.
So Vera is our database that allows all of us to communicate with one another. You know, that's how Viscardi actually, why we do so well. You know, if I notice something that's on the board, I enter it into each claim. Then when it gets passed on to the nurses like Dana, she notices that I saw something and I wrote it so she can look into it further. And then when it comes to certain providers, the nurses can email or task the admin to get more information. And I think it's just I want to say spider web, but it all just comes together where it just
Mhm.
falls right in the middle that everybody can know what's going on with everything. So I think it's a phenomenal database for us, and it works really well.
Yeah, I think what makes us a little bit different maybe than others, especially in our specialization of New York, is the ability that we track internally, not just through the workers' comp board site. We track internally SLUs, we track reserves, we track anything to do with a claim from the injury perspective, but also the medical perspective. And I think what really makes Viscardi nurses and admin different is, Sarah, especially, we manage a company where we integrate all the parts of a claim together. You know, if you're going to have, as Dana said, an injured worker, and let's take Mr. Montori gets injured, and Mr. Montori comes back 3 times with an injury to the shoulder, the next injury is to the knee, the next is to the back. We, and through that database, can manage all of it, see it all, and not have to go to some archive. It's live, basically real-time information. So I think, John, that has really helped Viscardi specialize in New York, particularly because we can track all decisions.
Yeah.
We can track anything that happens, as you said, to a par. What happened at level 1, what happened at level 2, what happened at level 3. We don't have to, our team doesn't have to go look. We have team members looking.
So it really is that combination of team connection through meetings and collaboration, the Viscardi wiki and VeraCare, our database that kind of comes together to allow us to do what we do.
And I would say we are always open to improving ourselves. So we do look back at any PAR decision on something we denied. One of our nurses denied something, and then say at the level 3 board decision, they overturned that and they granted that request. We do always look back and then meet to see what we could have done differently, or what issue there was that the board saw that we possibly didn't see. that allowed that treatment to be granted when we had a different opinion on it.
That's a really good point. And it actually brings to mind something else that's something that we've taken great care to do here, which is separate from any conflict of interest perspective, reviewing of PARs and case management work. So I'm not sure who to give that question to, but can somebody talk about that relationship and how we make sure that we're putting the best interests in the right places at all times?
Sure, I'll take that one. So when we receive a prior authorization request, we enter it in, and if it's a claim of ours and our nurse case manager is on it, we ensure that that same nurse case manager isn't reviewing the PAR request. We don't want any biases towards it. We don't want any type of conflict of interest. So we have a separate entity, a separate person reviewing it, review the medicals that have been entered, and then they suggest, they have their suggestions and recommendations, and then they have their response. And I think that's important that Viscardi does that, because as a nurse, you are in the claim and in the file pretty, avidly, and to have an outside person. And I think that's, in life also, there's one party, there's another party, and then there's an outside perspective. And I think that's what we do that's different from other people too. We have that outside perspective, a nurse, to review a claim, to review what the medicals say and what came in, to give their suggestions.
Yeah, I
Thank
think,
you.
Dee, you said it really perfectly. I think the nurse, our nurses advocate for our claimants. The medical professionals ensure that the standards of care are being followed. And if we stay on track with those two concepts together, I think regardless of whatever state you're working in, you'll provide the best care. I think what we didn't hit a little bit, John, we don't just collaborate together. We collaborate with our employers that we represent. We collaborate with the insurance companies, the adjusters, defense counsel, opposing counsel. I think what has made Viscardi really different over the X amount of years is our collaboration with all parties that have anything at all to do with the injured worker. And then you take the injured worker. So all of our nurses come back and talk to Dana and myself about their care, about their condition. So we've learned all of that, but we're constantly sharing. I think the key is we share.
Great. That's a very important aspect of our work. And I think a great way to end this episode of VISTV.
But before you do, I just want to quiz everybody here, and you're all going to kill me now because you're going to say, nobody prepped me for this. Where did workers' compensation start anyway in New York? Why is workers' compensation even an brand of insurance, a line of business?
The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire.
That's right, exactly. Because
And that will be episode number 2. Stay tuned.
And I don't just know that because my 8th grader is studying it in school right now.
No, it's true. When we had our first office, the picture that was in my office was a picture of everybody coming out of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory with things on their back, and there's so many great pieces on it. It changed the industry, safety and protocol. But like you said, John, that's a story for another day.
Yes.
I think it's also important to know that when you said X amount of years from Viscardi, you have been around for 20 years.
The celebration, the 20
Oh,
years
that's true, Dee. That's true.
Yeah,
Just trying to get another lunch out of us. That's what's happening.
You know me too well.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today and for this conversation. It's a great way to kick off VISTV season 3. I, for one, am very excited for the episodes that are to come. Some history on workers' compensation in New York and the broader implications for the country, and more perspectives from various experts in the field. So it's going to be a great season. And thank you very much for having me on as a co-host.
Pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. And thank you, everybody. And I look forward to seeing everybody again. So have a great day.